Hey everybody, and welcome to Level Up 2021. I'm your host, Mishka Katkoff, and two amazing guests, Brian Sapp from Jam City and Volkan Ediz from Super Evil Megacorp. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's a
All right,
pleasure.
so this is going to be an interesting discussion because we're going to talk about growth teams and growing growth teams, and what makes this very interesting, in my opinion, is that both of you represent very different type of gaming companies. So Brian's Jam City is, of course, very much a casual gaming company. You got amazing IPs, like you work with Disney, among others, Harry Potter, Disney, like all the big ones. And you got studios in different continents, not only different locations. And then we have Super Evil Megacorp. So basically a single studio company. You develop one super hardcore game at a time, and very much community-driven growth. There's esports, there's a lot of partnership that help you to grow. So can you talk about how your growth teams are structured and how they've evolved over the time? And let's start with Brian.
Sure. So just to kind of give the lay of the land of Jam City, see here, I joined Jam City in 2018, and when I came in to oversee the UA marketing team, Jam City had driven most of its growth from two legacy games. I think you're probably familiar with Cookie Jam and Panda Pop.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the team was structured around channels, which made sense, right? Like if you have like one product, let's say like your Netflix, it makes sense to kind of structure your team around channels. So what that means is like two buyers focused on Facebook, two buyers focused on Google, two buyers focused on video networks and DSPs. But Jam City started scaling more and more titles. And so when I came in, we were doing probably about 8 titles at the time, more were coming. And as we scaled more titles, there started being kind of cracks in the armor, if you will, with this structure around channels. Not to mention that I felt like, as a media buyer, focused on one channel was actually inhibiting your career, and you weren't understanding all the channels. So when I joined, shortly after kind of taking lay of the land, I actually reorged the team around games. And so this allowed for media buyers to be more focused on the health of a game, right? And understanding like what it takes to grow a game versus just focused on the channel. And kind of fast forwarding a couple years, more recently, I actually ran through another reorg. And so moving the team around games really helped. And we actually tried to keep it in terms of small teams, so teams of no more than 4 or 5 focused on a set of games so that they could kind of quickly share learnings, quickly communicate, and have tighter coordination with the studios. But more recently, as we kind of scaled the creative team as well, and a couple other teams that I created, which I'll get to in a second, it made more sense to actually reorg the team around what I call audiences. Mm-hmm. And main audience motivations. And what this really means is that we have games like our Match 3 games. And the main audience motivation for these is what we call achievement masters. These are people who like to just overcome challenges. You'll see this in marketing messages. Yeah. Make themselves smarter. So these are like the main audience motivations. And then we have, for a game like Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, which is a narrative RPG game, the main motivation is really character customization, storytelling, immersing yourself in the world. And then we kind of have other main motivations based on genre. Social casino might be slightly different. And so, more recently, we reorged the team around these audiences so that the teams could really focus in on what's working with that audience, mm-hmm. and what the main marketing message is, and what channels are working for that, and what, interest groups. And in that way, you're kind of getting this vertical approach to your marketing team. Another team that I created when I joined was called Creative Strategy. And so, before joining Jam City, I was at WB Games, and WB Games was kind of a console developer moving into mobile when I joined and helped build up the mobile business there. And typically what you'll see in console is like very strong product marketing teams, right? And I think most people are familiar with product marketing is, but it's basically looking at the audience, who's the audience we're going after, what are the product pillars, what's our core messaging. And these teams are super strong, but they weren't very data driven, from what I saw in traditional product marketing companies. And so basically built a hybrid team. It's a cross of product marketing and media buying, and call it creative strategy, so that they can glean, what's working with audiences, what's the main messaging, what's the information coming from product, but then also understand the data and a data-driven approach to, optimizing creative and building that creative roadmap. Because, performance marketing at most mobile gaming companies is the biggest P&L line item and cost item. And so, having a very data-driven approach and fusing these product marketing and data, is, I think, hypercritical. So anyway, you've seen kind of some evolution of how we org the team, and now we're basically going around audiences where we have artists, creative strategists, and media buyers all focused on one audience, so we can go really deep into that.
That's fascinating. So starting from channels before you joined, then moving into game specific UA teams, moving into audience teams that basically gives you this sort of a slice of the whole growth team. So you have your creatives, you have your media buyers, you have your data and data engineering teams, and all of them are kind of focusing on one audience that goes across your portfolio rather than focusing directly on a single game.
Correct. Yeah.
Nice. Very interesting. Very interesting. And one question regarding the product marketing, like, do you still have product marketers, or like, how does that interact with this audience team?
We do. We still have product marketing, and they're focused on what I'll call like non-traditional performance marketing activations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, last year we did a partnership with Wheel of Fortune for Cookie Jam, where we overtook the set. That was kind of really driven by product marketing. But these creative strategist roles are hybrid product marketing roles, but they're not going and doing these kind of bigger activations. They're really just focused on the creative roadmap for performance marketing, which then bleeds into App Store optimization, right? And it bleeds into our opportunities for these product marketing activations, right? Because, from a UA perspective, we are driving the fastest learnings around what's working in creative, period, because we're serving so many impressions, right? And so that really feeds into the other teams, the other cross-functional teams. So we still have product marketing, but just that this hybrid creative strategist role is a mixture of both. And more importantly, you're looking for a skill set that applies to both. That's really what it is.
Exactly. Fascinating. Yeah. All right. Volkan, how about your organization? I know previously you worked at Machine Zone, so it's not like esports and communities have been your jam forever. No pun intended with the jam.
It has been a steep learning curve for sure for me. It's a very different world, and the commonality with what Brian just mentioned is the more data-driven approach in general. That's definitely like a commonality. The creative strategy, which I will talk about in a second, is very similar to how Jamstee is organized their marketing team. And I think we also took like one step further in terms of like really integrating in the post-IDFA framework, like how the marketing team and the product team work well together. And I'll talk about this in a sec. But I guess it will be worthwhile honoring and mentioning all the amazing work that the original Super Evil Corp team had done with their first big hit title, Vainglory. I think that was released back in 2016, where Super Evil took like a very unorthodox approach back at the time, where they said, basically, let's not focus on performance marketing, while everybody was kind of like getting deeper and deeper in terms of like the user ID level tracking and approach, and finding like the high value users in a like 100 ad networks, and trying to come up with like a very detailed data cleanup work, etc. So it was like a very different approach for many other companies, and obviously I was on the other wagon working with like Machine Zone, where for us, like every bit of lever that you can pull off actually matters. That creates pockets of opportunities. It's all about LTV. It was a very different approach. But Super Evil's approach was different, because their core philosophy was very much inspired by Riot and Apple-like fanboys. Can we actually, as gamers, make a game that is so good that like the gamers will come and enjoy and play, and it's a word of mouth? Can we kind of like catch the fire? That was like a very, very different kind of like philosophy, the way they built the game. and was matching also the marketing strategy, which means that huge investment in the grassroots communities, right? Like, how do you create your kind of like evangelist for your company that will go ahead and say, dude, I played this awesome game, and that person tells 10 other people, and that 10 people tells another 100 people, you know? That's the grassroots community part of things. And there are many games out there, if you remember 2016, how bad the games look, and how how ahead of its time was the VG, kind of like our evil game engine. There aren't too many companies who had the honor or privilege to go on the Apple stage to help the companies sell their phones. The game was looking so good. Like, they decided like, hey, our CTO Tommy, can you please go on the stage and help us to kind of like display how awesome our kind of like new phone is. So we were at the stage with iPhone 6, iPhone 6 kind of like release. So the grassroots communities were important, the platforms were important, the partnerships with like Razers and the hardware companies were important, because again, the game was looking so beautiful and great, and the performance, like, it was way ahead of its time in terms of like its engine capabilities. We obviously, when influencers were another thing back in 2016, the company was also investing into growing those influencers, basically into kind of like a big names. If you think about it, they were still looking for, okay, what game am I gonna play, and who are gonna be my audiences? Like, the streaming was just coming in on mobile. And Super Evil kind of like took this approach. How do we build kind of like our audiences and kind of like grow it? And there's also like the esports aspect, just because of like it was a MOBA. There's a kind of like a huge overlap with like the how the game is considered as like hardcore competitive, which it was, and that kind of like led to a lot of like partnerships. And some of the big learnings there are just taking a step back. And this was before my time, but when I looked at data, I thought, okay, these guys were able to drive 50 million installs without spending a dime on performance marketing. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Like, how do you do that? And I'm coming from the other world, like the machine zone. It's all about data. You are basically trying to figure out how to get that particular user to check out your game. So my thought was like, how do I kind of like take and combine the strengths of the two kind of like approaches? One is more like a old school marketing approach, right? And I think in the post IDFA world, it's going to become like a very, very relevant again. And we will talk about it in a sec. And also, like, how do I combine that with like performance marketing and data and analytics and kind of like the very hypothesis-driven, very optimization-driven kind of like approach, so that we actually have like a sustainable growth pattern where we look at LTV, we make decisions, we kind of like do the performance marketing, we still do the influencers, we still do the partnerships. We still heavily invest in our community, like how do we grow our Discord community to help us out, to spread the word, also figure out the bugs in the game. We are still doing all those things, but combining the two approaches, like trying to be like the next generation of like the marketing organizations on mobile is something that I'm really curious about and aspired for. And to do that, what we did was we still keep the core strengths from the old days. We still invest in community. We still work with like partners, influencers. Not that much of an esports. We did not build the new game, Catalyst Black, hopefully coming out sometime this year. We did not build this game for super hardcore audiences, so it has a broad appeal. That means that it's not a perfect fit for esports, so we are not going to pursue esports for sure, or at least like this year for sure. But the idea is like, how do I kind of like build, design a game, reverse engineer a game where it is still like a multiplayer PvP game, because that's our core strength. And how do I kind of like extend its appeal to audiences? And I have a team that can kind of like match my strategy and exit. So we brought actually talent in from Machine Zone, from Anchor Free, from Riot. We brought like a creative art director, and we are having like a very kind of like hybrid team structure and approach. So in the traditional marketing teams, usually the marketing team and the product team are separate. But for us, my team actually owns live operations. So we oversee end-to-end the user journey from the moment that you see the ad, you come to the game, you download the game, you kind of like, we try to convert you, like which, for instance, like knowing the game economy really, really deeply well, which starter pack should we show to the users so that they will convert? So what are the subsequent kind of like pieces of user journey? So how do we tie this all end to end, if that makes sense? So that's kind of like a very new hybrid approach, like by the product and the product marketing and the live ops, they're kind of like all related, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like the next level of evolution, in my opinion, that we are trying to embark.
All right, so you changed so wait a minute. So the organization is divided into live services, and so basically the what's in the live service team? Like
Yeah. So we have been fascinated with the hyper casual gaming companies for quite a while. Right?
So Super Evil Megacorp has been fascinated by hyper casual.
Yes, we are trying to get smarter and smarter.
I'm just making sure I'm hearing this right.
No, you are hearing this right. We are trying to get smarter and smarter, and they will talk about like the market validation, I guess, longer. Some of the things that we have done, trying to help the product team as they are trying to make like the first phase, second phase product decisions, like what we are developing, how we are developing, like does my art style even make sense? What are my CPIs, IPMs? Is this game even viable? We asked those questions very, very early last year. Like we have done like a lot of different interesting things. But in terms of like how the live services is structured, is like our chief product officer and we work very, very closely. So the part of the product team and the design team and the designers, they are overlapping between two organizations, between the product and the marketing. So the way it works is like the product manager is responsible for the first time user experience, as well as like, let's say, what we're gonna sell in the shop, how we're gonna show it, and like what is the best conversion moment and value, how do we optimize this, and what is the value of the things that we sell in the product, like and how often we sell it to trying to sell those to our players. Like those are actually, especially within the first 30, 60 days, as users are still checking out your game. I think those are still very, very relevant to where the users come from. What, to Brian's point, what is that audience? Where do they come from? Who are they? Why are they into this game? What is their motivation? The sooner that you figure out who that person is and personalize the experience in the game, the better chance you have to kind of like convert them and give them like the experience that they're looking for. And because of that, we kind of like are both looking all the pre-install, what's happening before the pre-install, as well as like as they come to the product, try to quickly identify who they are and try to personalize the experience and give them the potential, the best kind of like
personalize the experience based on the source and based on the
we could talk about it a bit more, but also like the sales, like what are the the revenue targets we need to hit? What is my ARPI given this source, ad type, ad unit? Is it like an incentivized campaign, non-incentivized campaign? What am I going to do with this user? Like, and how do I kind of like also, obviously Super Evil really deeply cares about the user experience and the player experience. That's our core strength. Given that, how do we kind of like optimize that experience with numerically as well as like qualitatively? And because of that, the ideal thing to do is like for marketing team and the product team, we really get into the same room, iterate quickly on that experience, like from numbers perspective, from the visualization perspective, from the experience perspective, from the social perspective, like what are the growth tools that needs to be in the product falls under my jurisdiction in this new setup. It's very, very, obviously the product team is going to build it, but we have like a huge input and we kind of like build it together. Like we are making the game together with the product team, which is kind of like a very unique approach, in my opinion.
Well,
I love that.
It feels like it's inspired a little bit by Machine Zone structure. Like they had a somewhat similar division between the game teams and live service teams, of course, in a much larger scale of work. So this is kind of like a more pragmatic version of that, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. We are a small team, so we can move much faster the way that we are set up.
So Brian, you know, there's a lot of talk about game team and marketing team and how they work together, and that seems to be like the topic. So let me hear your opinion on, like, you know, not on hyper casual and hardcore games, but let me
Where they're one and the same. Yeah.
yeah, let's avoid that. But give me an opinion on like how the marketing team should work, and in works in your case, or like in your opinion, how they should work through different stages of production, whether that is concept validation or production, or, you know, going live, being live. And what are the sort of pitfalls that you've seen throughout your career, like Warner Brothers and now Jam City, with the marketing team and the product team working together? And you've done a lot of restructuring, so that means you've seen something work, seen something not work, changed how things work based probably on those things. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. A lot there. So I think first off, there is, I know you said not to talk about this, but there is inspiration from hyper casual. What I mean by that is, what I mean by that is, like, I think they have the best green light process that there possibly could be, because they're basically building games very quickly and they're testing them in the market very fast, and it's a numbers game. And so, you know, when with the rise of hyper casual and talking to those teams, I was like, you know, this needs to be happening to the extent possible with regular, you know, mobile, not regular, not that there's unregular, but with you know, within the gaming world, this needs to be happening. And so it's a little bit tough for depending on the titles, right? Because with IP, you have typically a couple years of a game in the making, and there's some baggage that comes with that, and you can't pivot that as much as you might want, due to how those games are conceived. But with non-IP, you do have more, let's call it, more of a range to explore. And so early in the greenlight process, you know, the UA team will be involved in, you know, and you might say this might be traditionally product marketing, but, you know, I think it really kind of falls on UA team's shoulders, because they're in the trenches every day, but understanding obviously forecasting what the possible CPI needs to be competitive in that market, which then in turn obviously is LTV, right? And that ties back to the product, as well as understanding like total market opportunity, right? And to some degree, like that for a large part of the industry, that is a UA problem, right? That is like, you know, it's a product UA problem combined together. And so to the extent possible, running tests on top of funnel, you know, with new game concepts is critical to understanding what the potential CPI could be. Now, you know, the industry, you know, those tests are only information, and they shouldn't be taken as law, because the way a lot of these tests are run is that we're faking games, you know, we're faking what that top of funnel might look like. And, you know, and maybe this will change with iOS 14.5, but the majority of campaigns right now are purchase event campaigns. And so you can't really fake that in any meaningful way. Yeah. Obviously, having a large portfolio, you know, you get an understanding of what good looks like versus not, and I think that's where, you know, portfolio companies have advantages, because they can quickly see, you know, what the top of funnel, what's good on top of funnel, what's good on in-game metrics, and kind of figure that out and triangulate a lot faster than if you have few games. So, you know, that's where the UA team can just help suss out opportunities. I wish it was more foolproof, to be honest, but there's really no foolproof way to do it. The other aspect there, which is not UA related, but it's just consumer insights, right? Surveys, market research, and understanding what users want to the degree possible. Then once you kind of move into soft launch, I think that's where the close partnership really starts, which is both teams are going to be in discovery mode, and kind of what Volkan's talking about is basically on the UA side, we have these ideas of what we think the audience is. We think what their main motivation is. We think we know what the demo we're going after, but you don't really know until you hit the live market. And there's been times where like the studio's been like, this game appeals to young people. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it doesn't, because no young people are clicking on this damn ad, you know? Like, and so like, as much as you want your game to be this, it ends up being something else here. Yes. And that's all through the soft launch phase. And similarly, that's when you zone in on what the main motivations are, because you're doing all these concept testing, right? Could be character collection, could be immersion, it could be the meta, it could be, you know, it could be puzzles. It does, you know, there's a million different ways to go, but this phase is critical for really ironing in on what's the motivation that's appealing to the widest addressable audience and that's bringing in users. And that information needs to be passed back to the product team, and the product team likewise on the product roadmap, needs to prioritize around that if there's a there. And then once you're through the soft launch phase and everything, makes sense to some degree to go worldwide, that's really where you kind of start honing in on tentpole events, right? And so this is really critical where marketing and product are aligned, obviously product roadmap, and then live operations. And certain games are going to appeal and need more UA around live operations than other games. And it's certainly not all games, because some live operations are too insider baseball and new users don't even understand what's going on. Others, like let's call it like our game Disney Emoji Blitz, we have Star Wars coming to it multiple times a year, and that's a huge live operation and a huge like tentpole event, where we are shifting how we buy in that game pretty significantly. So, and then I will say lastly, if there's a retargeting operation, this is actually where live operations needs to be very much in sync with product, because bringing users back in is all about those events and those limited time events and those rewards that you're offering users. And that is of probably all the teams, the retargeting is the one that needs to be lockstep very closely with product.
So I got a couple of questions, because this all makes sense till today.
Till maybe in about 20 minutes from now.
So in that sense, like, how is the playbook changing because of two things? So funnel conversion, like the high level IPM, I think that stays the same because it's really easy to replicate. There's a bunch of services. I personally use Geek Lab, but there's other type of services that allow you to test it. And I think that becomes even more and more important because it's just so easy to test the top of the funnel, test your store conversion, get an idea of your CPI. Got it. That's probably nothing there. But the next step you mentioned is like, what kind of audiences are you getting in? Well, now you can't track on a campaign level. So you don't know whether you should do a meta ad, whether you should do this ad. So probably the step from there is now you have to actually understand what kind of players are getting into the game. What is their motivation? And then take that back into your ad campaign and be like, hey, actually the players we're getting in are very altruistic. So let's turn the ads where I'm helping somebody in Emoji Blitz or in Hogwarts to do something, and now you're getting that and well under. Am I online here or?
Well, I think one, we still have Android, so let's say there's a granularity there that will apply. I think it's just I don't think the principles that are important here go away. What goes away is some of the granularity. So what I mean by that is that you will still be able to broadly test concepts if you're running these tests in the right way. You could, for example, and by the way, UAC came with lack of granular data, and we and others got very smart about how we creative tested on that platform, where in theory you weren't even able to creative test because you're throwing up 40 or 50 creative. But if you think about it, you just got to move your optimization up a level higher, right? So you might throw in completely one concepts on Facebook for 2 weeks, right? That's just one concept. See how it performs, and then move to another concept. So you're not going to be able to do it, at the granular level you want, but you can still do it at, a much higher level and still get the results you're looking for and still measure success there. To some degree, we're not going to be getting return on ad spend at the granular campaign level. So this whole thing, everything we look at is just moving a couple levels higher, and we're looking at the total population, total installs, total value of those users versus what changes we're doing on the marketing side. So yeah, we're used to doing it at the campaign level. It's just moving up a couple levels, but it's still the same optimization problem.
That makes sense. Less granular. So
but I think we can still get to what we think is working based on how the traffic changes and how the in-game metrics change.
Detailed question. Re-engagement has worked for you?
Yep. Yes, it has. And this is very game by game specific.
Now it has to be true because I've asked this for many UA heads, and most of them, I would say 2 out of 10 would say it works. Rest says nope, no success.
Well, I think it very much depends on the game.
Yeah, of course.
Depends on how long the game's been out. Depends on how big that addressable pool that you can retarget of valuable users is. So there's a lot of caveats to it. Certainly doesn't work across all games, you know, and so it's very game specific.
Yeah, and how do you welcome back the players who have been out and are now coming back? So there's that return flow.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to, it's very live operation driven, right? So we want to reward users for coming back, and that's a big part of it. And you can think of it as obviously incremental revenue, right? And that's how you should probably think about it. But you can also think about it as CRM, right? So in this day and age, keeping your valuable users in your ecosystem is probably one of the most important things you can do. Correct.
I agree. So Volkan, you talked a lot about how your team has been set up with basically the growth team being at the same time live ops team. Without, like, we can elaborate on that, or another theme that I could ask is like, if you could build your team from scratch, like without the previous, would it look exactly like this, or would you approach it in a different way, like giving the learnings that you've had now? Or let's put it this way: in an alternate universe, you're given advice to your alternate being. So there's no
bizarro Volkan.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what I mean is basically, like, there's no legacy of decision making, because usually in decision making, the organization plays a big role. There are people, and you can't just move around people like pawns, and there are certain things. So what I'm trying to ask, like, without any of these human limitations, what would the organization look like to be super lean and mean for hardcore games?
Sure. Before I go, like, the core skills that I'm looking for, I think it is important to share how I think about hiring in general. And I believe it is important to hire people based on their strengths and try to find like a complementary skill set. So if you think about like that, like a Venn diagram of like different skills, and usually the leaders have a tendency to hire people that are look-alike. They know who they are, and they kind of like hire the same type of like archetype of people. So the teams tend to lack like this kind of like T-shaped skill set, right? And we have been talking quite a bit in detail, like the marketing is shifting and changing. Now it's going to be both quantitative and qualitative, and tech skills, they are all going to become important. Given that, with the way that I think about it is like, as I'm looking at Venn diagram, like, what are the areas that we are super weak? I don't know anything about that area. Like, what are the skill sets that we require? And do they match actually our kind of like tactical, strategical kind of like decisions coming up in the next 2 to 5 years, knowing that the mobile landscape is changing, right? For me, the three sets of that Venn diagram right now is one, creatives. Brian talked about it, like creative concepts. Those are going to be very, very important. Maybe it's not going to be like back in the 70s, like, 1 minute ads. But now the attention spans of the new generation is so low, trying to figure out how to capture the interest of the audience in the first 3 to 5 seconds, because that's all you have. That's all you have, right? If you look at Facebook, Google, if you look at like how people consume your ads, it happens very, very quickly. And so you need to stand out. You need to stand out to your audience, with your message, with your creatives. You need to tell who you are, how you are different, how to play your game, and how is your game is that kind of like will provide that happiness that they are looking for in Madman's term. Again, I'm a big fan of the show, so I think like there are lots of like inspirations, but that's going to happen. So finding out the concept and the message within that concept is important. But that's not enough. So for that, you need like a very kind of like a close collaboration between the product team and the creative team. And a good story, I'm going to come back to the other 2 core skills, was like, again, maybe from the hyper casual studios, one of the CEOs was telling me like, they basically build the levels if the metrics back out, right? Otherwise, they don't build it. Like, they built the game up to like level 5. If items are not good enough, they don't build it, because it doesn't mean anything. Like, they cannot launch the game. And in the other extreme case, they actually had built the games, and for the past 9 months, they were looking for the right creative to be able to launch the game. Yeah. That's the other extreme, So we don't want to be in that camp. But creatives are going to be important, and the the broader appeal with the change of the IDFA, the broader appeal, like the catchy gameplay, stand-up graphics and mechanics, all how we communicate is going to be very, very important. So every marketing team needs to be very, very strong going forward with creatives and have a solid understanding of like what gamers really care about. Why do they care about the visual aspects of the game? You know, for different genres, the expectations will be different. Sometimes you can get away with like 8-bit graphics, and sometimes you need to have like a visually stunning graphics. Like, so you need to know, you need to figure out who your audience is. The second core skill, we talk about creatives. The second core skill is like the tech and the quant skills. Performance marketing is not going to go away. It's changing its shape, its form. It is going to be less deterministic. It's going to be more probabilistic. But the mapping between the concepts and the audience and the in-game product performance, building that tight iterative loop and having a strong data infrastructure to be able to process that data, understand again how the audiences are coming to your game and consuming your game, and trying to optimize for that kind of like top 10, 20% that actually help you to monetize and kind of like make the game profitable. Understanding their needs, catering towards that, and optimizing their experience through quant data is going to be important. So I think that in the future, I will imagine that every marketing team will have a few software engineers, a few data engineers, very strong data scientists, you know, a few machine learning scientists, as well as like, you know, again, matching them up with the creative people, right? So that's going to be important. Lucky for us, we don't have to build the tools anymore. Tools are commoditized. I mean, that's great, you know, we are not back in 2016. And the networks are kind of like consolidated. So with Facebook and Google, they are offering a lot of like optimization algorithms, you know, upfront. But you still have to solve for the LTV optimization. You still have to solve for the bid optimization, portfolio optimization, creative optimization, computer vision. There's a lot of like new components coming in that you need to take your tech stack to the next level. So that's kind of like where I think the marketing team who have the edge on the technical side will have a chance to win. And the third aspect is the product knowledge, which we talked about, like, you know, that's kind of like my bet around like having a deep understanding of the product and how people are coming to your game and how they're kind of like consuming it and like what to offer them, what is their engagement patterns, what is their purchase patterns, how do we kind of like make sure that they come back the next day, and thinking about like the re-engagement to Brightpoint. And re-engagement is the whole CRM suite. It's not only one touch point. Like if you try to buy from the app network, my personal experience from my previous companies was like the re-engagement doesn't work. It's super profitable if you do email. It's super profitable if you do push notifications. But if you just go ahead and try to buy it for re-engagement, that is for Forex genres, it didn't just work. So what is it that new CRM suite is going to look like, and what are the touch points, this multi touch point attribution models for re-engagement? How do I bring users back? And how do we kind of like give them delightful experiences when they come back? That's going to be important. And for brand new users, again, almost like scripted experience creation based on who they are, what their motivations are. Those are going to be very, very important. Like this intimate knowledge of the product and the users. Like I think maybe we should touch base on the user motivations. Like one data set that we use is 12 traits. Like they have fantastic data. Like they tell you more than you are willing to know, you know, about what the intrinsic motivations of your users are. Taking that, translating that into creatives, bringing users in, giving them the experience they are looking for. From the moment they see your tutorial to kind of like they start unlocking the game modes and they make a decision like, oh my gosh, this weapon looks awesome. I want to spend $20 right now. Like, how do I build this experience, right? So those three core skills, they need to all play together in the future for marketing. So marketing is changing and shifting, and you know, it's a little scary post-IDFA world, in my opinion, but it also provides a lot of like opportunities, like on extreme, super high technical, you know, AI, machine learning for optimization decisions, and combining that with the madman creatives. Like, how do you do that? And still do like a delightful experience? I think the opportunities are amazing. It's a great time to be a mobile gaming marketer in general, I guess, in the next 5 years. I'm excited.
Well, I wouldn't say that too quickly, but I do appreciate the optimism. I read also the other articles that are way more negative.
I mean, I agree. I think 14.5 is an opportunity, period. And I think people who've been in it for a long time feel that way as well.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of unsustainable, this track of like just whale hunting and costs rising. And I think that was not great for the industry either.
Yeah, so opportunity for those who have less optimized user acquisition channels compared to, or less vertically integrated user acquisition channels compared to.
Well, I think gaming is going to be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be a little bit worried about these D2C companies that built their backs on Instagram and are like selling luggage, you know, to like a small addressable audience.
So
that's what I would worry.
Sorry, guys, to conclude, because we have limited time. If this was a podcast, we'd be going on for 3 hours. But to conclude this part, Brian, do you agree that what Volkan said? So basically, the teams that you're building for future success have to have creative, have to be creatively strong. They have to have technical and tech and quant expertise, and most importantly, they have to be very much knowledgeable about the product.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was to break it down into like 3 principles, if you will, from an org structure, you just want to make sure you're aligning communication learnings and keeping the team nimble. Like however that is, it's going to be different for each company. That's critical. I think for people, kind of agreeing, very much agreeing with what Volkan said, which is I think critical thinking is like the #1 skill, followed by data chops and communication / strategy setting. Like those are 3 skills I think that are absolutely critical because that'll allow the teams to adapt to changing situations.
Yeah.
And then the last one is technology, and it's making sure that either through third-party companies or tools that are available, you're leveraging machine learning and kind of where the industry is going, which will help keep teams very nimble, as well as making sure that humans don't get in their own way, which they have a habit of doing with data, I think.
Well, this was fantastic. So let's conclude on these learnings. Thank you guys for joining the webinar.
Cool.
Thank you for having us.
It was fun.
Thank you.
Nice talking to us.